Your resting heart rate is naturally low, you're lying in bed. It's somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning, and you're not fully asleep, but you're not fully awake, just hovering in that gray zone where you're dimly aware your chest is rising and falling. Somewhere in there, your heart is beating quietly, unhurried. Like it has nowhere to be. Most people never think about this. But your heart in that moment is telling you something extremely specific about the condition of your cardiovascular system. And unlike the number on a scale, or how you look in a mirror, it is almost impossible to fake. That number, how many times your heart beats per minute while you're completely at rest, is called your resting heart rate. And here's what's actually happening underneath it. When you train your heart consistently over months and years, something physical changes inside it. The left ventricle, the chamber that pumps blood out to the rest of your body, actually stretches and expands. It holds more blood with every fill, so when it contracts, it pushes out more with a single beat. Your heart delivers the same oxygen, the same fuel, the same everything your body needs. It just needs fewer trips to do it. Like upgrading from a compact car to a cargo van. Same route, fewer runs. What makes it different from just being calm or having low blood pressure is the autonomic signature behind it. A low resting heart rate in a fit person reflects what's called high parasympathetic tone. Your nervous system's rest and repair branch running strong, actively braking your pulse rather than passively letting it idle. Most adults sit between 60 and 100 beats per minute. Fit individuals tend to hover between 50 and 60. Elite endurance athletes sometimes drop below 40, their hearts beating so efficiently that a resting rate that would signal unconsciousness in an average person is just Tuesday for them. A chronically elevated resting pulse, by contrast, signals sympathetic dominance, your fight-or-flight system running too loud, too long. That state quietly accelerates the hardening of arteries and independently predicts earlier death from both cardiac and non-cardiac causes. If your heart beats like it has all the time in the world, that's because it does. You recover quickly after exercise. Picture two people walking up the same flight of stairs. 4 floors, no elevator. Both reach the top at the same time. One of them grabs the wall and stands there for a solid 3 minutes, breathing hard, waiting for their heart rate to come back down. The other glances at their phone, takes a few easy breaths, and keeps moving. By the time they reach the door, they're already talking normally. The difference isn't willpower or toughness. It's a measurable biological mechanism called heart rate recovery. Heart rate recovery is how fast your heart decelerates after exertion stops, and it is one of the most brutally honest indicators of cardiovascular health that exists. What's actually happening is this. The moment you stop exercising, your parasympathetic nervous system, the same rest and repair branch tied to your resting heart rate, has to reactivate and actively pull your pulse back down. In fit people, this vagal reactivation is fast and strong. In deconditioned people, it's sluggish. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine followed over 400 adults for 6 years and found that people whose heart rate dropped by 12 beats or fewer in the first minute after exercise had a roughly 4-fold increase in all-cause mortality, and that relationship held even after accounting for age, sex, cardiovascular risk factors, and how hard they'd worked out. What makes this different from simply not getting tired is the involuntary nature of it. You can push yourself through the discomfort of exercise. You cannot will your vagus nerve to fire faster. Recovery speed is a window into the autonomic architecture of your cardiovascular system, and you either have robust architecture or you don't. Some researchers have found that measuring recovery at just 10 seconds post-exercise may actually be even more predictive of coronary-related death than the standard 1-minute measure. 10 seconds. The very first breath after you stop. The people who recover fastest aren't the ones trying hardest. They're the ones whose bodies have quietly been preparing for years. Everyday activities feel easy. You've carried 2 dense bags of groceries from the car, not rolled them on a cart, not split them into 4 trips, carried them, both at once, across the parking lot, up the stairs, into the kitchen, and set them on the counter without really thinking about it. For a significant portion of the adult population, that sequence is a workout. Their forearms burn. They have to put a bag down halfway up. Their lower back aches afterward. You probably didn't think about it at all. That ease, that quiet, unremarkable competence in the physical demands of daily life is what exercise physiologists call metabolic reserve. And the science of why some people have it and others don't is remarkably specific. During any physical task, your body is consuming oxygen and producing energy. As demand increases, you pass through what's called the first ventilatory threshold, the point where your breathing begins to accelerate non-linearly, lactic acid accumulates, and the sense of effort shifts from manageable to uncomfortable. For a deconditioned person, climbing a hill or carrying a load crosses that threshold fast. The body reads a moderate domestic task as intense exercise. Breathing becomes labored. Muscles fatigue quickly. The talk test, whether you can hold a conversation, starts failing. For a fit person, that threshold sits much higher. Carrying bags, walking uphill, moving furniture, these tasks barely register as metabolically demanding. Their aerobic reserve is so substantial that the gap between resting and the effort these tasks require is enormous. What makes this different from simply being strong is that it isn't primarily about how much you can lift at your maximum. It's about how much energy you have left over at any given moment. Functional metabolic reserve is what protects against frailty and physical disability as you age. The ability to meet life's ordinary demands without treating them as athletic events, most people have lost this without realizing it. They adapted to their limitations gradually, quietly, and now they assume that feeling exhausted after carrying things is just what life feels like. It isn't. That exhaustion is a signal. You can walk and talk at the same time. You're on a walk with someone. A real conversation is happening. You're making a point. They're responding. You're threading a story through it, and neither of you has paused for breath. No one has said hang on and slowed to a shuffle to catch their wind. The ground isn't even flat. This seems like nothing. It is not nothing. The ability to sustain moderate physical activity while maintaining fluent speech is a clinical marker with a name, the talk test, and it directly maps to a physiological boundary called the first ventilatory threshold. What's happening is this. When you're working below that threshold, your body's carbon dioxide output is being cleared efficiently by your breathing. Ventilation keeps pace with metabolism. You can sustain effort without triggering the hypertnia, the rapid, deepening breathing that makes speech difficult. You have reserve. You're working, but you're working within your system's comfortable operating range. Cross that threshold and everything changes. Breathing becomes urgent and rhythmic. Sentences get cut short. You answer in fragments. Mid-sentence, you lose the word you were reaching for because your brainstem has quietly reprioritized resources. What makes this different from just being in decent shape is the precision of what it measures. The talk test maps almost exactly to lactate threshold, the metabolic inflection point that predicts aerobic performance more reliably than almost any other single variable. Researchers use it as a low-cost, no-equipment substitute for lab-grade exercise testing because it's that accurate. Light runners can carry on full conversations at paces that would leave most people unable to breathe. At a normal walking pace, they have so much aerobic headroom they could probably recite a poem. If you can tell a story while climbing a hill without anyone noticing you're working, your cardiovascular system is doing something genuinely impressive. Your walking speed is naturally fast. You've probably never timed yourself walking. Why would you? It's just walking. You put one foot in front of the other at whatever pace feels natural and get where you're going. But that natural pace, the speed you default to without thinking, without pushing, is one of the most powerful predictors of mortality in the entire medical literature. Walking speed is called a vital sign in clinical gerontology, ranked alongside blood pressure and resting heart rate. The reason is structural. Walking requires your cardiovascular system to supply oxygen, your lungs to exchange gas, your nervous system to coordinate balance and motor sequence, and your musculoskeletal system to generate and absorb force, all simultaneously, all automatically. When any of those systems begins to fail, pace slows first. The body finds its way to the path of least resistance. A pooled analysis of 9 longitudinal studies covering over 34,000 older adults found that every additional 1 meters per second in habitual walking speed was associated with a 12% reduction in the hazard ratio for all-cause mortality. Not a 12% reduction in symptoms, a 12% reduction in the risk of dying from anything, and the relationship was linear and dose-dependent across the entire range. A separate UK Biobank study tracking over 420,000 middle-aged adults found that slow walkers had double the mortality risk of fast walkers over a 6-year follow-up. Double. Not marginally elevated, not slightly higher. Double. What makes this different from simply being athletic is that it's passive. You're not measuring how fast someone can sprint when motivated. You're measuring what their body does when no one's watching and there's no goal in sight. Default pace reflects default capacity. The people walking fast through airports, through parking lots, up hills, not because they're late, just because that's how they move, are often the same people who score best on every other marker in this list. Your body's resting pace is a signature. Make sure it's one you'd want to show a cardiologist. Your balance is excellent. Stand up. Lift one foot off the floor. Just hold it there. For some people, 10 seconds is easy. Comfortable, even. They could do it with their eyes closed. For a surprising fraction of the adult population, particularly above age 55, this is genuinely difficult. They wobble. They reach for something. Their planted foot skates sideways in tiny corrections they're not fully aware of. The ability to hold a static one-legged stance for 10 seconds is an independent predictor of mortality. A prospective cohort study of over 700 adults between 51 and 75 years old found that those unable to complete the 10-second one-leg balance test had an 84% higher risk of death from any cause over the following decade, after adjusting for age, sex, BMI, and pre-existing conditions. The failure rate at baseline was 1 in 5. By the time participants were followed up 5 years later, that fraction more than doubled. What's actually being measured is sensory-motor integration, the coordination between your visual system, your vestibular apparatus in the inner ear, and the proprioceptive sensors embedded in your muscles and joints. Your brain is constantly triangulating information from all three to keep you upright. The subcortical pathways that process this feedback and fire the tiny, rapid corrections to your postural muscles are the same pathways degraded by neurological decline, joint degeneration, and a sedentary life. What makes balance different from just core strength is that it's primarily a nervous system metric, not a muscular one. You can have strong abs and fall off one leg in 4 seconds. Balance is about the precision of your proprioceptive wiring and the speed of your correction loops. Failing this test at 55 doesn't mean you're old. It means something in your neuromuscular system has already started a conversation your doctor should know about. Passing it without even trying means something important. Your body's wiring is still running clean. You can get up from the floor without using your hands. Sit down on the floor right now. Cross your legs. Now stand back up, but no hands, no knee push, no rolling to the side. Just the floor and your body. Most people over 45 can't do this cleanly. Many people in their 30s can't do it cleanly. And yet it appears with extraordinary statistical weight in one of the more striking longevity studies published in the last 20 years. The sitting-rising test, developed by Brazilian physician Claudio Gil Araújo in the late 1990s, scores your floor-to-stand transition out of 10. 5 points for a clean descent, 5 for a clean ascent. Lose a point for every time a hand, forearm, or knee touches the floor. Lose half a point for a visible wobble. It takes about 45 seconds to complete. The results, across 4,282 participants followed for 12 years, were remarkable. People who scored between 0 and 4 had a 3.84 times higher risk of natural mortality and a 6-fold higher risk of cardiovascular mortality compared to people who scored 10. Mortality rates ranged from 7% in perfect scorers to 42.1% in the lowest scorers. And each single point improvement in the score was associated with a 21% improvement in survival. This test isn't measuring one thing. It's measuring mobility, strength, flexibility, stability, body composition, and balance simultaneously, in one movement with no equipment in less than a minute. The act of crossing your legs on the way down requires hip mobility. The descent requires eccentric leg strength and body control. The ascent requires explosive power through the legs and core. The whole sequence requires balance throughout. What makes it different from a standard strength test is exactly that multiplicity. You can deadlift twice your body weight and still struggle here if your mobility or balance is compromised. It interrogates the whole system, not one variable in isolation. Every point matters. Every point is worth something. You sleep well and wake feeling ready. You don't lie awake for an hour waiting for sleep to arrive. You don't cycle through shallow, brittle sleep that breaks at every noise. You fall asleep within a reasonable time. You stay there. And when your alarm goes off, you feel not immediately brilliant, maybe, but genuinely rested. Like your body did what it was supposed to do while you weren't conscious. This isn't luck. It's physiology. The relationship between fitness and sleep is bidirectional and deeply entangled. Regular physical training improves sleep architecture, increasing the proportion of slow-wave sleep, the deep, restorative phase during which growth hormone is released in concentrated pulses. Growth hormone isn't just for building muscle. It drives cellular repair, tissue regeneration, and metabolic restoration. Without adequate slow-wave sleep, that repair process is compressed and incomplete, but the causality runs the other way too. Partial sleep deprivation, just one night capped at 4 hours, impairs aerobic performance by over 4%. A full night of no sleep cuts endurance performance by more than 11%. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis responds to sleep loss by raising cortisol, which elevates baseline cardiorespiratory strain and psychological load. People who sleep poorly tend to exercise less the following day. Less duration, less intensity, which then degrades sleep quality further. The loop compounds. What makes good sleep different from simply resting is the specific restorative chemistry of slow-wave sleep that nothing else can replicate. You can lie on a couch for 8 hours and not get it. You can be unconscious and not get it if your sleep architecture is fragmented. True sleep, the kind fit people tend to get more of, is a metabolically active state in which the body quietly processes damage, consolidates memory, and restores hormonal equilibrium. The people who say they can function on 5 hours might be right about functioning. They might be wrong about everything else. Your energy lasts all day. 2 o'clock rolls around. The lunch digests. The afternoon light goes flat. And a significant portion of the working population quietly begins to deteriorate. Attention drifts, decision-making blurs, the desire to close the laptop and horizontal becomes almost gravitational. You're not immune to tiredness. But that particular crash, that wall, that mid-afternoon collapse into cognitive mush, it's either absent or dramatically milder for you than for most people around you. This isn't caffeine. It's mitochondrial efficiency. Physical fitness changes how your cells produce energy at a foundational level. Consistent aerobic and high-intensity training drives mitochondrial biogenesis, the literal multiplication of mitochondria, the organelles that convert oxygen and fuel into ATP, the body's usable energy currency. More mitochondria per cell means greater energy production capacity per unit of oxygen consumed. The metabolic machinery becomes more efficient. The body extracts more from less. This has a practical consequence that goes far beyond exercise performance. It means your muscles and organs operate with greater efficiency all day. During desk work, during meetings, during grocery shopping, during every ordinary demand. Your body spends less metabolic effort maintaining basic function, leaving more in reserve. What makes sustained energy different from simply not being tired is that fatigue accumulates differently in fit versus unfit individuals. Fit people show lower levels of inflammatory cytokines at rest, better glucose regulation across the day, and a flatter cortisol curve, meaning the stress hormone that rises and falls throughout the day does so more predictably and returns to baseline more reliably. The metabolic floor is steadier. The mid-afternoon crash is sometimes treated as universal, like gravity. It isn't. It's a sign of metabolic inefficiency, and it's reversible. Your back rarely hurts. You've sat at a desk. You've driven a car for 4 hours. You've slept on a bad mattress in a hotel room, and at the end of any of these, your back feels fine. Maybe a little stiff. Nothing that doesn't resolve in a minute of movement. For a startling number of people, this is not their experience. Chronic low back pain is the leading cause of functional disability worldwide. It costs more lost workdays and medical spending than almost any other condition, and much of it isn't caused by injury or structural damage. It's caused by endurance failure in the muscle that hold the lumbar spine together, the core musculature, rectus abdominis, transverse abdominis, internal and external obliques, erector spinae, the deep paraspinal muscles, doesn't function primarily to create movement. It functions to resist unwanted movement, to stabilize, to hold the spine in its optimal position while everything else around it moves. When the endurance of these muscles degrades, the spine bears load it wasn't designed to carry alone. Discs compress unevenly, joints wear, inflammation accumulates. Pain arrives. Clinical researchers use a battery of isometric hold tests, the trunk flexor test, the Beering-Sorensen extensor test, and bilateral side bridge tests, to assess core endurance. Interestingly, the research shows that it's not absolute strength that matters most. A ratio emerges. People with a higher posterior chain endurance relative to anterior abdominal endurance, a better bridge-to-plank ratio, show significantly lower self-reported disability scores. The back of the core needs to be proportionally as strong as the front. What makes this different from simply having a strong core is the distinction between strength and endurance. A 1-rep maximum deadlift tells you nothing about whether your core can sustain a stable spine through 6 hours of sitting, or 3 hours of driving, or a flight. Endurance is the variable that protects you daily, not your peak capacity. The people who never think about their back aren't lucky. They've just, often unconsciously, maintained the muscle quality that keeps the architecture intact. You recover from soreness quickly. You worked out hard 2 days ago. Deadlifts, maybe, or a long run with hills, or something that asked your muscles to decelerate load rather than just push it. Eccentric loading, muscles contracting while lengthening, is the primary trigger for the microdamage that causes soreness. Most people who pushed as hard as you did are still walking stiffly, still noticing the familiar deep ache when they sit down too fast. You're already feeling close to normal. This isn't just a matter of fitness level, though fitness matters. It's immune system efficiency, specifically, the behavior of macrophages inside your muscle tissue. When exercise causes microdamage to muscle fibers, sarcomere misalignment, microtears in the structural scaffolding, your immune system mobilizes. Neutrophils arrive first, releasing compounds that clear cellular debris. Then monocytes, recruited from the bloodstream, differentiate into pro-inflammatory M1 macrophages that continue the cleanup through phagocytosis. As the debris clears, the local environment triggers a phenotypic switch. M1 macrophages convert to M2 macrophages, which secrete anti-inflammatory signals and release growth factors that activate satellite cells, muscle stem cells, to proliferate and rebuild the damaged tissue. Fast recovery means this M1 to M2 transition is happening quickly and cleanly. The inflammatory phase is completing its job and handing off to the repair phase without getting stuck. What disrupts this is chronic low-grade systemic inflammation, the kind associated with sedentary behavior, poor diet, metabolic dysfunction, and biological aging. When the baseline inflammation level in the tissue is already elevated, the inflammatory signal from exercise damage can't be distinguished from the background noise. The transition stalls. Soreness lingers, repair drags. Fit people recover faster not because they damaged themselves less. Often they damage themselves more because they worked harder. They recover faster because their immune machinery is running cleaner. You'll be back in the gym before most people can walk downstairs normally. You can carry heavy bags without thinking about it. Grocery bags, suitcases, a box of books, a 40-pound bag of dog food slung over one shoulder. You've carried things like this, and the limiting factor was usually logistics: where to put it, how to fit it, not whether your body could manage the load. Grip strength might be the most underrated physical biomarker in medicine, and it's measurable with a device that costs about $30. The PURE study, Prospective Urban-Rural Epidemiology, tracked 139, 691 adults across 17 countries for a median of 4 years. The finding was stark. Every 5-kilogram reduction in grip strength was associated with a 16% increase in all-cause mortality, a 17% increase in cardiovascular mortality, and a 17% increase in non-cardiovascular mortality. Grip strength was a stronger predictor of cardiovascular death than systolic blood pressure, more predictive than blood pressure. In 140,000 people across 17 nations, the biological reason is that grip strength is a proxy for global skeletal muscle quality. Lean, well-preserved muscle tissue is metabolically active. It regulates glucose, produces signaling molecules, maintains insulin sensitivity, and supports organ function in ways we're only beginning to catalog. When muscle mass and quality decline, the whole system becomes metabolically fragile. Above-average grip strength also requires scapular stabilization, core engagement, and coordinated force transfer through the kinetic chain from shoulder to fingertip. Carrying a heavy bag isn't just a forearm exercise. It's a whole-body isometric integration test. For men, there's a protective threshold around 42 kilograms of grip force. For women, around 25. Above those numbers, the mortality benefit begins to plateau. Below them, risk climbs steadily. If you've never thought about whether you could carry something, that's the answer. You sit tall without reminding yourself. You don't have a sticky note on your monitor that says posture. You're not setting a phone alarm to remind you to stop slumping. You just sit reasonably well, stand reasonably well. Your shoulders aren't perpetually curled forward like someone bracing against a headwind. Good posture isn't a discipline. It's a structural outcome. And in fit people, it's largely automatic. The muscles responsible for maintaining upright posture, the deep cervical flexors, the lower and middle trapezius, the thoracic erector spinae, the rhomboids, are slow twitch, oxidative muscles. They're designed for endurance, not explosive power. Their job is to fire continuously at low levels throughout the day to keep joints aligned. When those muscles have sufficient endurance capacity, they do their job without conscious input. The skeleton lands where it's supposed to land. When that endurance capacity has eroded, from sitting too much, from a lack of varied movement, from a sedentary lifestyle that keeps the same muscle groups shortened and others chronically underloaded, the postural system starts to fail under sustained demand. The deep stabilizers tire and disengage. The larger, more powerful muscles compensate in ways they weren't designed for. Shoulders round. The head migrates forward. The lumbar curve flattens or exaggerates. What makes this different from simply bad habits is the muscular substrate beneath it. You can consciously correct your posture right now and hold it for about 90 seconds before fatigue and attention drift returns you to your default. Your default posture is determined by the endurance capacity of your postural muscles. You can't willpower your way out of an endurance deficit. People with good involuntary posture aren't more disciplined. Their postural muscles have more reserves. And those reserves translate to less pain, less joint wear, less fatigue. Across every waking hour, your flexibility is functional. You don't need to put your feet behind your head. That's not fitness. That's a structural feature of your hip sockets and the ligament tension you were born with, and it predicts exactly nothing about your health or longevity. What matters is whether your joints can move through the range of motion that ordinary life requires, and whether they can do so without compensation, bracing, or pain. Reach overhead. Both arms, without arching your lower back dramatically to get there. Can you do it? Can you tie your shoes while standing without bending your knees excessively or rounding your spine into a dramatic curve? Can you rotate your torso far enough to look behind you comfortably? Can you sit on the floor cross-legged for 10 minutes without your hips aching? Functional flexibility is joint range of motion that is actively controlled, meaning you can move through it under muscular tension, not just with gravity assisting you on a stretch mat. The distinction matters because passive flexibility without active control creates instability. A joint that can move into a range the surrounding muscles can't control is a joint at injury risk. Grip strength research points to a parallel. Maintaining flexibility sufficient to carry loads comfortably, reach overhead without compensating, and rotate through the torso without restriction requires joint mobility that is actively reinforced by surrounding muscle tone. Muscle tone and joint mobility reinforce each other in a virtuous loop when you stay active and degrade together when you don't. What makes functional flexibility different from circus flexibility is usefulness. You're not measuring how far past 90 degrees your hamstrings can go on a mat. You're measuring whether your body can serve you in the actual physical geometry of your life. Getting in and out of cars, putting things on shelves, sitting on the floor with kids, sleeping in a position that doesn't wreck your neck. If you can do all of that without thinking, your mobility is doing its job. You actually enjoy moving you didn't used to. Maybe you remember it. Exercise as something to endure, something to survive, something you negotiated with yourself to get through. You'd set a timer, and the entire time the timer ran you were aware of the timer running, somewhere that changed. Not dramatically, gradually. You started to notice you wanted to go, not because you felt virtuous about it, but because the absence of it felt worse. This is not a personality shift. It's a neurochemical one, and the mechanism is specific enough that we know exactly what changed. For years, the runner's high was attributed to endorphins, the brain's endogenous opioid peptides released during intense exercise. The problem is that endorphins are hydrophilic, water-soluble, large molecular weight, unable to cross the blood-brain barrier. The peripheral endorphin release during a run is real. Its central mood effects are not, because the molecules can't get in. The actual mechanism is the endocannabinoid system. Exercise-induced muscle contraction stimulates the synthesis of lipophilic endocannabinoids, specifically anandamide and 2-arachidonoglycerol, small fat-soluble molecules that cross the blood-brain barrier freely. Anandamide binds to cannabinoid receptor 1 on neurons in the forebrain, disinhibiting dopamine pathways and producing the euphoria, anxiety reduction, and analgesic effect that people report post-workout. When researchers administer naltrexone, an opioid blocker, to exercise subjects, the euphoria remains intact. Block the endocannabinoid receptors and it disappears. You are, in a precise pharmacological sense, running on the same receptor system as cannabis. Your brain has adapted to produce these signals more readily in response to movement, which means the threshold for experiencing them drops. What makes this different from simply getting used to exercise is that the reward circuitry is now calibrated differently. Movement triggers a response. Absence of movement begins to feel like subtraction. The craving is real, not metaphorical. People who love exercise aren't more motivated than people who hate it. They just have more anandamide at the finish line. Your heart rate doesn't spike during small efforts. You've climbed 2 flights of stairs. You're not sprinting, not carrying anything heavy, just walking up. And when you reach the top, your heart rate barely registered the transition. You haven't even really noticed anything happened. For someone with a deconditioned cardiovascular system, that same staircase produces a measurable spike. The heart accelerates fast and high, trying to match the sudden increased oxygen demand, because the cardiac output it can generate per beat is low, and the only way to compensate is to beat faster cardiovascular efficiency under moderate load, is what this asymmetry reveals. And it maps directly to a measure called the chronotropic response index, how appropriately and proportionally your heart rate responds to increasing physical demand. In a healthy, fit cardiovascular system, moderate exertion produces a moderate response. The heart has enough stroke volume, enough blood pushed per beat, that it doesn't need to race to meet demand. Small efforts stay small. The system is operating well within its headroom. When this calibration breaks down, a condition called chronotropic incompetence, the heart fails to increase its rate appropriately to match metabolic demand during progressive exercise. Paradoxically, deconditioned individuals often spike dramatically to moderate loads and then fail to reach appropriate peaks during intense effort. The heart's response becomes poorly matched to the work. What makes this different from just having a low resting heart rate is the dynamic picture it reveals. Resting bradycardia is the stillness of the system at rest. Appropriate cardiovascular scaling is the intelligence of the system under load. Both are necessary. One without the other tells an incomplete story. Your heart should change when you ask it to. It should just never need to shout when you've only whispered. You can keep up with kids. They don't stop. That's the thing about children. They don't pace themselves, they don't negotiate rest intervals, they don't check their heart rate. They run because running is available and they stop when something more interesting appears. Then they run again, and you can keep up. Not perfectly, not forever, but genuinely. You're on the ground, you're moving, you're present in the game rather than watching it with relief from a bench. This is what exercise physiologists call functional fitness, the integrated capacity to meet the unpredictable physical demands of actual life rather than the structured demands of a gym environment. And it's harder to train for than any single fitness metric because it requires everything simultaneously. Aerobic capacity, muscular power, agility, coordination, quick recovery between bursts, joint tolerance for repeated impact. Interval-style activity, short bursts of high effort followed by brief recovery, tests the cardiovascular system differently than sustained aerobic activity. Your heart has to respond quickly, recover quickly, and respond again. The faster that recovery happens between intervals, the more robust the underlying cardiovascular machinery. What makes keeping up with children different from running a mile is unpredictability. A mile is a known quantity. You can pace it. Children are not a known quantity. They lunge sideways, they change direction, they sit down, and then immediately sprint. The motor demands are chaotic, and your system has to absorb them in real time without warning. People who can do this effortlessly have usually built a broad enough base of physical capability that it overflows into whatever the moment demands. They didn't train for this specific scenario. They trained their body to be capable in general, and capable in general turned out to be enough. You can control your body weight and space pull-ups, dips, a plank held for time. These movements ask one specific question of your body. Can you generate, transmit, and control force using your own mass as both the load and the object? The answer predicts more than you might expect. A longitudinal cohort study, published in JAMA Network Open, followed over 100 middle-aged men for 10 years. Researchers measured baseline push-up capacity and then tracked cardiovascular events, diagnoses of coronary artery disease, heart failure, and related outcomes. Men who could complete more than 40 push-ups at baseline had a 96% reduced risk of cardiovascular events, compared to men who could complete fewer than 10, a 96% reduction. That association was stronger than the risk predictions derived from maximal treadmill exercise testing. What makes relative strength different from absolute strength is the ratio, force output divided by body mass. A person who can lift 300 pounds may have tremendous absolute strength and still struggle with pull-ups if their body mass is disproportionate to their lean muscle tissue. Calisthenics test relative strength, the body's ability to control and move itself. This ratio reflects lean muscle quality, body composition, and functional neuromuscular integration in one assessment. There is also something specific about upper body relative strength that matters structurally. The muscles required for push-ups, pectorals, deltoids, triceps, scapular stabilizers, are the same muscles that protect shoulder joint integrity, maintain thoracic posture, and support the upper kinetic chain through decades of daily use. 40 push-ups is a threshold. Below 10, the cardiovascular risk data starts to look concerning. Between those numbers, every push-up you can add is moving you in one direction. That direction is straightforward. You move without forcing yourself. You take stairs without deciding to take stairs. You park further and walk without congratulating yourself for it. If the elevator is there, you might still take the stairs simply because you're already moving in that direction, and stopping feels like more work than continuing. This isn't discipline. It's what exercise scientists call spontaneous physical activity, movement that occurs outside of formal, planned exercise, and it is regulated by a specific neurological system in your hypothalamus. Orexin neurons in the lateral hypothalamus synthesize and release two neuropeptides, orexin A and orexin B, that bind to receptors distributed widely throughout the brain and peripheral nervous system. These signals integrate metabolic inputs, circadian rhythms, and environmental cues to regulate alertness, wakefulness, and critically, the drive to move. Fit individuals display higher baseline sensitivity to orexin signaling. The pathway that says, there's a staircase, use it, fires without requiring a conscious override. The postural adjustments, the fidgeting, the preference for standing rather than sitting when both are available, these are orexin-driven behaviors that accumulate into what researchers call non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or NEAT. And NEAT varies enormously between individuals, accounting for hundreds or even thousands of calories of energy expenditure per day in highly active people versus sedentary counterparts following the same formal exercise routine. What makes this different from being motivated to work out is that it operates below conscious deliberation. The people who naturally move more aren't virtue signaling. They're not running a background cost-benefit analysis on every opportunity to take stairs. Their hypothalamus has calibrated them toward movement as a default state, not a chosen one, The less you have to decide to move, the more your body has made the decision for you. That's a system running well. You rarely get sick. You know people who catch every cold that travels through an office, every seasonal bug, every respiratory thing circulating in winter, every stomach thing that passes through a household. They get it. They get it harder and for longer. You don't. Or you get it lighter. Or it's gone in 2 or 3 days when everyone else is still miserable at day 6. This isn't luck and it isn't genetics. Primarily, it's immunosurveillance. For nearly 4 decades, the dominant model in exercise immunology was the J-curve hypothesis. Moderate exercise enhances immunity, but intense exercise suppresses it, temporarily opening a window of vulnerability to infection. This hypothesis was based on a real observation. Circulating immune cell counts, particularly lymphocytes and natural killer cells, dropped below baseline for several hours after intense exercise. The interpretation was wrong. A comprehensive re-evaluation of the research by Campbell and Turner demonstrated that this post-exercise decline in circulating immune cells is not caused by their destruction. It's caused by their redistribution. After intense exercise, primed immune cells, particularly natural killer cells and cytolytic T cells, migrate out of the bloodstream and into peripheral mucosal compartments, the lungs, the gut, the upper respiratory tract, the exact tissues most likely to be exposed to pathogens. They're not gone. They're deployed. Rather than suppressing immune function, exercise improves immunosurveillance, the continuous patrol of tissues for pathogens and abnormal cells. Over the lifespan, this delays immunosenescence, the age-related decline of immune function, and reduces the baseline inflammatory environment that makes older, sedentary individuals so vulnerable to infection. The people who never catch anything aren't avoiding exposure. They're winning the encounter that's happening all the time, in every system, every day, the one you never see. You handle heat better than most people. It's the middle of summer, humid, 34 degrees in the shade, the kind of afternoon where people go inside and stay there. But you're moving around, and while everyone else looks slightly defeated by the temperature, you're sweating efficiently and functioning normally. This is thermoregulatory adaptation, and it's one of the clearest physiological signatures of a trained body. When core temperature rises during exercise or heat exposure, the body has to transfer metabolic heat from the active muscle to the skin surface, where it can be dissipated through evaporation. This is primarily done through sweating and cutaneous vasodilation, redirecting blood flow to the skin. In a deconditioned person, this system is less sensitive, slower to activate, and less efficient when it does. Core temperature rises higher. Heart rate spikes to compensate for blood shifted away from working muscles to the skin. Cardiac output struggles to meet the competing demands of muscle and thermoregulation simultaneously. Training, and specifically heat acclimation, recalibrates this system in several concrete ways. Even 5 consecutive days of exercise heat exposure expand plasma volume by approximately 7%, which gives the cardiovascular system more fluid to distribute between muscles and skin without compromising either. The threshold at which sweating is triggered drops, so cooling begins earlier. Sweat rate increases. Sodium's concentration in sweat decreases, preserving electrolytes. What makes heat tolerance different from simply being used to hot weather is the physiological underpinning. Acclimation produces real biological changes: expanded plasma volume, earlier sweat onset, more efficient sodium conservation. Not just psychological adjustment, the people thriving in the heat when everyone else retreats aren't tougher. Their thermal management systems have been trained. You feel sharper after you move. It's not just not feeling tired. After a workout, or even a long walk, or a vigorous 20 minutes of anything, your mental clarity actually improves. Thoughts connect more readily. Focus narrows in the right direction. The afternoon's decisions feel crisper. This is not placebo. It is specific molecular biology. During physical contraction, skeletal muscle doesn't only do mechanical work. It functions as an endocrine organ, releasing signaling molecules called exerkines directly into the bloodstream. Among these are lactate, irisin, osteocalcin, and beta-hydroxybutyrate. These molecules are small and lipophilic, fat-soluble, meaning they cross the blood-brain barrier readily. Once in the brain, these exerkines converge on a common target: the upregulation of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, particularly in the hippocampus, the brain region central to spatial learning, memory consolidation, and emotional regulation. BDNF binds to its receptor, tree, and triggers downstream cascades that promote neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, and synaptogenesis, the formation of new connections between them. Exercise is, in a literal molecular sense, fertilizer for the brain. Not metaphorically, chemically. What makes exercise-induced cognitive enhancement different from caffeine or stimulants is the mechanism. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, temporarily reducing the signal of accumulating fatigue. Exercise increases the structural capacity of the neural tissue itself. More neurons, more connections, better maintained myelin. The sharpness after a run isn't borrowed. It's produced. People who think better after moving aren't imagining it. They've figured out, however accidentally, how to dose BDNF. And the prescription is free. You feel younger than your age, not in a vague, wistful sense. In the specific sense that when you do things, physical things, your body responds the way it would if you were 10 or 15 years younger than your birth certificate claims. Chronological age and biological age are not the same number. They can diverge by decades. The biomarkers that predict mortality most accurately are not calendar-dependent. Habitual walking speed, grip strength, static balance, and the ability to transition from the floor. These metrics reflect the integrated functional capacity of your cardiovascular, neurological, musculoskeletal, and metabolic systems simultaneously. They measure what your body can actually do right now, in this body today. Gait speed research across 34,000 older adults shows a linear, dose-response relationship between walking pace and lifespan, but it also shows that the variation within any given age group is enormous. Some 65-year-olds walk faster than some 35-year-olds. And the data suggests that the 65-year-old walking fast will likely outlive the 35-year-old walking slow. The grip strength data from 140,000 adults across 17 countries tells the same story. Grip strength is more predictive of cardiovascular mortality than blood pressure, and the range within an age cohort is wide enough that the strongest older quartile consistently outperforms the weakest younger quartile. What makes biological age different from chronological age is that it can be altered. Mitochondrial function, muscular stem cell reserves, arterial elasticity, immune efficiency, cognitive reserve, all of these respond to physical activity and can be maintained, reversed, or preserved in ways that have nothing to do with when you were born. People in their 50s who have stayed physically active for decades frequently outperform sedentary people in their 20s on the very markers that predict how long they'll live. Age is a rough draft. Fitness edits it, the biggest sign of all. Here's what none of the previous science has quite said directly. The fittest people, the ones who score well on heart rate recovery, on walking speed, on grip strength, on the sitting rising test, on balance, on all of it, aren't necessarily the ones who look the part. Some of them are not lean. Some of them don't have visible muscle. Some of them you would not pick out of a crowd as the person most likely to outlive you by a decade. Fitness is homeostatic capacity. The ability of the body to absorb stress, physical, metabolic, thermal, immunological, and return to equilibrium. The ability to meet what life asks of it without treating every demand as a crisis. The cardiovascular reserve, the neuromuscular precision, the metabolic efficiency, the immune intelligence. These operate quietly and invisibly, and they are built over time by a body that has been consistently asked to do things. The most meaningful sign you are fitter than most people is not a single metric. It's the cumulative absence of the signals that indicate a body struggling to meet its own demands. It's not noticing your heart when you climb stairs. It's not thinking about your legs when you get up from the floor. It's moving through your day without your body making itself the center of your attention. The body you maintain quietly protects you constantly. It fights infections before you know they arrived. It stabilizes your spine before your back has a reason to hurt. It delivers oxygen to your brain before you feel like thinking. Most of that work is invisible, which is exactly what you want. If any of this matched your experience, leave a thumbs up. And if it matched more than you expected, hit subscribe and drop in the comments. How many signs were yours?